Thanks very much for joining us today. And we have a really interesting group of presenters today. I've had the downright luxury of talking with each one of them about the opportunities they've had to really support more turned outward culture. And we've asked them to speak about this a little bit and share some of their experiences and insights that they've had as they've gone along the journey with being more turned outward. So this is our topic, supporting a turned outward culture. And I think you've all seen that because you wouldn't be here otherwise, I don't think. This is what we're going to cover today. Just a little bit about the Harwood Institute for Public Innovation. Then we're going to move right into the presenters, starting with Kelli Knapp and Beverly Leonhardt from the Warren Public Library in Pennsylvania. Then we'll move on to Erwin from the Chula Vista Public Library and Jean from the Springfield City Library in Massachusetts. And after each one of their presentations, I've said this before, if you've got questions for them as they're speaking, put them in the chat box in the lower left-hand corner, and I'll be monitoring that chat and be passing the questions along to them. We found in the past that actually the questions that participants have really form a really interesting and wonderful part of these webinars. So don't hesitate to ask questions there. Then after each one of them make a presentation, and their presentations aren't terribly long, we're going to get them all together in one space together to just share a few reflections and lessons learned to pass along, so you have some own insights that you can apply for yourself. And then we'll just close with some observations and questions that you have in discussion, and I'll cover some opportunities that are coming up with the Institute. So to get started, a little bit about the Harwood Institute. The Harwood Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that really seeks nothing less than to spark fundamental change and authentic hope in public life. We do this, as many of you know, by cultivating, coaching, connecting, and supporting public innovators, which we really define as leaders that are trying to create hope, change, and progress in their communities and the lives of the people that live there. During the 30 years of the Institute, and this is the 30th anniversary of the Institute, they've created a set of field-tested tools and frameworks that have become the foundation of a practice that accelerates community change and that is really rooted in the hopes of its citizens. Harwood principles have been successfully applied in public, academic, private, nonprofit sectors, many public libraries, as many of you here know, school systems, newspaper, healthcare, public broadcasting, United Ways, and just a lot of different community-based organizations. The basic premise is that if you turn outward, make more intentional choices and judgments in creating change, you'll produce greater impact and relevance in your community. So in today's presentation, I've asked each of the speakers to speak to the topics that you'll see on the screen here. You know, when and where did your journey with Harwood and turning outward start? What were the initial steps for you in your library? How has the practice spread since you started working with the Institute? What internal change have you experienced as a result of turning outward? And then what do you see coming next with your turning outward and with turning outward efforts in your community? So they're not necessarily going to talk about it in this order, but these are topics that we're trying to cover for you folks. And with that, we're going to dive right into our first presenters, which are Kelli Knapp, Director and District Administrator in the Warren Public Library, and Beverly Leonhardt, Reference Librarian, also at the Warren Library. And the Warren Library, as you see here, it's a small independent library located in a city of about 9,000 people. And I'll just turn it over to them.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kelli. This is Bev. We started with this process almost 2 years ago now. And when we started, we found out, once we got going, we found out we're smack dab in the middle of the waiting place. So I just thought I would start out by letting you know that right from the very beginning. When I started as director in 2017, my plan was to have a community outreach focus. And so when I heard about the turning outward process at a state library meeting, I decided that this was something that we really needed to do. This was going to really help us along with that process. And so I reached out to some of my staff who I felt would not only be good with this, but would also be willing to participate. And we came on board very excited. We were very, very excited to get started on this. We started out with our community conversations, both inside and outside the library. We had several of those, but we knew that we had to get everybody internally on board first. So we started out with some informational sessions with the Board of Trustees, with our Friends Board, and at our department manager and staff, full staff meetings. We had them fill out the turn quiz and the ask tool. We worked with them on the community conversation questions, and they have been updated throughout the process at their monthly meetings so that they are aware of what's been going on.
Sure. From that point, we kind of went into, we were finding our board was interested in finding out what we learned. We asked them to engage with some of their family members. What was it, 3 or 4 people? Mm-hmm. 3 or 4 people within their sphere who weren't related to each other, in order to go through the community conversation questions. I think we gave them 5 of the 10 questions to focus on. And they came back saying, man, this is harder than we realized. Now we get what you're doing. And so that was a good experience with the board, so that they understood, you know, how these things were going, and also what it was like to try to draw out those conversations. The staff and the management, we were finding that they, kind of like us, were bogged down in the details, weren't quite getting what we were asking. And I think part of that was our expectations going into the program of, we're going to be able to do some big thing. And then as we found, we're in the waiting place, and learning just what exactly that means, as far as there are limitations, but what we can expect and should be striving for within that to move forward. We started to focus on smaller wins and telling those stories of what we could do within the library. And all of a sudden, it was like the light kind of switched on, especially with our managers. Mm-hmm. As you know, we had some examples all of a sudden of, well, I rode the elevator the other day with a woman who was wondering why we don't provide fax services, because, you know, she wants to be able to do it at such and such a time, but has to wait until the drugstore opens. And we kind of went through the getting everybody on the same page about the whys and the wherefores, but some dialogue with the drugstore, so that if we don't want to compete with their business, but if they ever stop offering the service, which is right across the parking lot from us, then we would work to fill that gap. And they're like, oh, like even something that small, something we're already doing and talking about? Yes. And so that's where, moving forward, it's those stories and those little changes, whether it's getting everybody on the same page so there's an understanding, or actually changing or accomplishing something. That's where the understanding has come in. And as a result, we're all listening more in all of our interactions and engaging instead of just head down doing our job.
I think once everybody, the boards and staff as well, realize that this is a philosophy, a culture that we are that has become a part of us. Once they realize that, and it's not a to-do list, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, we've got to do that. I think everybody kind of took a sigh and realized, oh yeah, this is something that we can make happen. I get it now. So that was very very positive. We're planning some things internally because of this. We had heard about other people that have done this. So we've talked about incorporating this into our job descriptions and our interviews, our new employee and board orientations, so that everybody's aware of how this works and what's expected, and that this is a culture. And we also have had an attitude change, I think, with our staff. It's taken some time, but this whole process is a long process. It doesn't happen overnight. But they've been hearing a lot. There have been a lot of comments from board members and patrons and people who've been coming here for a long time that are walking in and saying, wow, I don't know what it is, but there's just kind of an energy here now. There's something going on that's not real obvious, but we can tell as soon as we walk in. And that kind of made the light bulb go off for me. It's just like whatever it is that we started to incorporate is making a difference, and we love that.
So as far as moving forward, I mean, right now it is very much an internal change. We're sharing what we're learning and what we're finding out with our community, and there are some organizations that are very interested in what they can do to kind of bring the practice in for themselves, and we're looking forward to working with them. Mm-hmm. But if we can continue to grow as a staff and this library within the community, I think those stories are going to kind of spread beyond. And one of the things with being in the waiting place is that everybody is waiting for the right person to step forward and make the change, be the difference. And we're hoping that as these stories go outside the library and then others start to get involved in different things that they hear and they think they can do something about, or they know somebody who can do something about, that the individuals in our community and the groups in our community will start to feel empowered to be that person or the group that steps forward to make the difference, instead of feeling like they have to wait. So that's where we are and what we've done so far.
It's been a long process, and it was very difficult for us until we kind of came to the realization that it was okay to work on the small wins, and that it was okay to start internally. Even though this isn't an internal process, you really have to make sure that internally you can turn outward. And we had to make sure that we were able to do that before we could move forward too far outwardly.
So we have some questions for you. Really good. Thank you very much for sharing that. One real simple question, but maybe not so simple to answer, from one of the people here. What is the waiting place?
I didn't bring my binder, so I don't have the definition right in front of me.
Well, let me ask you this. So you're saying the waiting place, what does it feel like?
The basics are that we are stuck. There's a lot of old habits and a lot of old ways of doing things that people feel like they can't break out of. Nobody feels like they have the power to do anything, but they kind of feel like, well, if the right person were to come along, if we got the right mayor, if we got the right councilman, whatever it may be, then we'd start to see some good things happen. And as a result, nothing happens because everybody's waiting for somebody else to do it.
Right. That's actually a very good description. That's very
smack dab in that.
Yeah. So for the person that was asking that question, there's a framework in this practice called community rhythms, which talks about how all communities are not the same. For example, they described everybody's just stuck. You know, they're waiting for somebody else to do something. You can get to a point where you're tired of waiting and people tend to move up and start doing. And then you start moving into a different phase at that point, in a different kind of community. But they're talking about a framework called community rhythms. We have a question here about what are some of the tools and ways that can help a staff understand turning outward, and how do you implement that? What are some of the things that you did to help the staff to understand what turning outward was or is?
The turn.
Well, we used a couple of the really short videos that Rich Harwood produced, and those were helpful to, that was like the initial, okay, this is the basis of what it's all about. And then we did use the turn quiz, and we used the ask tool. And we went, when we had the opportunity, once we got through some of those basics, then we did work on some of the same questions that we used in our community conversations.
Okay. So the videos, a lot of the videos are available on the Harwood website. The turn quiz that you're speaking of, I think, is a tool called Harwood in a Half Hour that you can get off of the website. What was one of the other ones you used? Besides
the ask.
The ask tool, that's another Harwood in a Half Hour that you can get off of the website. A lot of these tools are available for libraries and you know, in state-sponsored forums, on ALA-sponsored forums, and they're basically, you just go there and they're free for the taking and using. Let me see, you have a question. How difficult was it to get the community organizations on board? We don't have resistance, just apathy.
It wasn't easy. I would say it's still not easy, especially being where we are as far as our community stage of life. That said, we had organizations that, when they found out we were doing conversations, invited us to come to their group meetings and do a conversation with their members. And those same people have asked to be kept in the loop of what we're learning, what we're finding out, which we're really just getting into the knowledge sharing point. We kind of feel like that's really where we're going to see things take off within the community, as some of these groups that were already interested hear what we've learned and heard, and they're like thinking about what they can get involved with, or whether they want to reach out into their spheres of influence to get more public knowledge that we're all sharing.
Okay. So one other question here, which is a follow-up to the last one, same person. When you used the turn outward internally, did you use the same questions, or did you focus on ways for the staff to turn outward within the organization itself?
Yeah, we started out the same as we would with the community or anybody else. We wanted them to really understand it from the ground up. Mm-hmm. And then we kind of spread out a little bit after that, but we wanted to make sure that they had the understanding of exactly what we were asking the community for.
Yeah, and typically I can say that's the way that coaches tend to encourage people, is start with the community, because the library is part of something larger than itself. And we encourage people to use the questions in the context of the larger community of which the library is a part. One other question I have for you, just because I think it would be interesting to people. You talked about early on about you realizing smaller wins were important. and starting to share stories of what you could do with some smaller wins. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what did those stories actually look like?
Well, we found out from a couple of our community conversations. We did a lot of conversations outside of the building, probably more than we did inside. And we found out, for example, that one of our local retirement homes, we didn't realize how secluded they felt, even though they're just a couple miles up the road. And so, to make this really short, we provided some of the feedback that we got from them to our adult services person, and she reached out and she's been working with them to provide some services. There will be more coming this winter. That a partnership with them and their, for their activities staff. So that's an example. It's been slow. I can't deny it. It's been very, very slow, but that's, once we realize that we're accomplishing something, it made us all feel a little bit better because we're stuck. We're just a stuck community.
Yeah. We also, in talking with teens, they were saying, you know, well, we don't feel like there's much at the library for us. And it's one of those, you go and you say, this isn't just about what the library can do. This is about what we all as community members want our community to be like, but we're still the librarians that they know. And so there's always within the feedback that we received that library, a lot of requests or wishes or thoughts about the library specifically, in addition to the community in general. Mm-hmm. And so that's another thing that we've been, really focusing on. It's becoming a bigger project, but every step along the way is one of those small wins. Mm-hmm. So when we said, well, we'd like to set up a teen advisory group because we haven't had one, and have a couple of you meet at the library and start helping us plan some of the things that you want to see happen. And the kids showed up and have continued to show up on a regular basis. And, that first step of the first meeting was maybe in some people's book a small win. To us, it was a pretty huge win. But just those things, especially those things for our staff it's already part of our job, but doing things a little bit differently and thinking differently and listening. Listening is the key.
That's the key for sure, is listening.
So I would say for those listening here, Beverly just gave an example of a really good story. I mean, you started out with listening. That listening gave you an insight around the teens. The teens led you to set up an advisory board. The first reading of the advisory board, you had a good turnout to that. Now other things are happening. And it may start with something small, but the thing is, you're telling a story of change. And being able to have a story of change and tell that story of change to other people in this practice is hugely important, because what you're doing when you're in the waiting place, people don't believe change happens. They're just stuck. And what you're demonstrating is that we can change here and that we are changing. So it gives people belief. So I would say Yahoo to that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Forgive me for preaching a little bit, but I can't help it. Yeah. Do you want to say something? And then we'll move on to Erwin. Do you have anything else you want to say?
Just something that's a little bit off topic, but we had a really cool community conversation that we did outside of the library. We had a mom that had attended one of our internal conversations, and she was talking about these kids that had graduated from high school but were still young adults, and how they met at her house regularly, and they were talking about things that they wanted to happen in the community. So Bev went to her house one night, and when the kids were gathering there to do their game night that they always did, And she sat at their house and talked with these young adults and had a great conversation.
And they presented their aspirations in charade form.
Oh.
It was pretty cool.
That sounds
So think outside the box.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And I think what we're going to do now is move on to Erwin. And oops. Yeah. So let me see here. There you go, Colleen. You get the right camera in place. So Erwin is somebody that I first encountered a couple of years ago in California. I think at that point was originally with the San Diego City Library.
Yes.
Yeah, and now he's at Chula Vista. And I'm not going to give any more introduction other than I think Erwin's a really super guy, and I'm glad you're able to join us today.
Well, I have to live up to those expectations then, Carlton. So my name is Erwin Magbanua. I'm principal librarian at Chula Vista Public Library. So my story with Harwood began actually in 2013. A friend of mine, Kelli from LA Public Library, had mentioned that she was doing this pilot program called the Harwood practice, and she said it was revolutionary, and I was very intrigued. I didn't really understand it until I think the ALA conference in 2014, when one of my librarians went to a Harwood session, and she came back with the presentation from it. Again, more intriguing, and I really wanted to be part of it. And in 2016. This was when I was still at San Diego Public Library. In 2016, I was part of the cohort for San Diego Public, and then I immediately, just like within like 10 minutes of it, I immediately understood what its value was and how special it was, and how really it was, as Kelli had mentioned, it was revolutionary to me, and how integral it can be to our work as public librarians. So at San Diego Public, I went through the 18-month arc, and as it was ending, I left San Diego Public and went to Chula Vista, where I am now. And funny enough, Chula Vista was just starting its arc, so I have kind of an interesting experience of being kind of like in two practices, or two cycles of the practice, and one ending, one beginning. So I got a do-over. Also interesting is that at San Diego Public, I was doing it as a support staff member, and now I'm doing it from an administrative point of view. So again, it's given me a really like a full picture of how this is, how it works, and how effective it is. So in both libraries, in San Diego Public and Chula Vista, the initial steps were, of course, to talk to administration about it and get buy-in from the administration. At San Diego Public, it was, as I think what Kelli and Bev were saying, they presented it via videos with Rich, and so that was actually really effective. We also used the Ask tool and the turn quiz. The turn quiz, I think, is really effective, and we got buy-in from the administration. We were able to move forward with it with a lot of the community conversations. And Chula Vista, when I got here, the administration was already part of it. So that part of the cohort was the administration, including myself. So we were already bought in. So then was for here, the first steps were really to try to get staff to understand what it was and experience the community conversations for themselves. We felt like just having them do the community conversations would be really an effective way to get them going. And understanding really what the practice is. So we did community conversations with staff. Those went really well. We have three branches, so all three locations. We mixed up the staff, all different classifications. And then we had staff go and do actual community conversations with the community. We chose the group of teens, the demographic of teens for our initial conversations, and a couple of adult ones, but we mostly focused on teens just so that we had a focus. And so what was great about those is that that staff really got the experience of what it was like to do one, to take notes, to ask the questions, and really like listen to what they were saying. And I think because of that, I think we did a dozen of the conversations. Because of that, it's still to this day, and this happened last year. I got here last year, and we started pretty much right when I started here. Since then, staff, I've noticed they still talk about those conversations of what they've learned from them. Right now, we're still kind of getting the themes from the conversations, as well as, you know, trying to put together a statement about what we've learned, the knowledge statement. But staff since then have very frequently referred to those conversations, like, hey, remember what the team said, or remember what they were saying. So a lot of the things that were happening to, at least internally for us, and we shared the notes, by the way. So the notes we put out, and we invited all the staff to take a look at the conversations and see what exactly. So those who didn't participate in particular conversations could see what was discussed. And so now when we do any kind of like program ideas or program planning or development, there's always, somebody always says something about, yeah, but the conversations, don't you remember they said this? Or do you remember this theme? Remember they want cleanliness? Remember they want, they're looking for safety in this aspect. So that has remained sort of a guide for us when we plan, at least on the programming side. I mean, even just the last week we had our librarians meeting, and a couple of librarians did mention what they were doing. They're planning for programs, they're doing outreach, and both of them said, hey, you know, let's, but we're making sure that it's what the conversations that we had with the teams or with our community are aligned with the themes there. And I also get from staff as well when they're asking me like, oh, should I do this? And then the follow-up question is that turned outward? What do you think? So that's always fun to kind of like, okay, let's look at that. Is it turned outward? And then the other thing that we've been doing as well is we're really discussing partnerships. We're looking at our partnerships and our relationships with organizations, including those of other city departments, and really looking to see if we are turned outward in our relationships, or are those organizations turned outward themselves, because we want to align what we're doing. We want to be aligned with what, you know, with turning outward. We're hoping that they're also aligned with turning outward. So we took stock of of our partnerships. We looked at the relationships and what they did, and how they talked as well. That was one thing I kind of pushed, is how, when you talk to these partners, what do they talk about? Do they talk about themselves a lot? Or do they talk about the community? One really good example is the elementary school district is a major partner of ours. In fact, I'm in the innovation space, which is a space that they use here, that is such a great example, because when we talk to them, or when we talk to the school district, all they talk about are the kids. They never talk about themselves, or like how, you know, they're like this top-rated school in California. They always talk about the kids and how are we improving their lives. How are we improving the lives of families? That to me was a really good example, and that was of a turned out organization. And that's one of the things I always try to remind our staff, is that that's an example of a really good partnership. So when now the conversations that we do have, when we are looking at partners, looking at our previous partners, also partners that we want to work with moving forward, are they turned outward? And we'll talk about that. And, you know, and so that changed a lot of how we look at things. We're just kind of like not doing the same old partnerships anymore. I think we're looking for something new, and I think that's invigorating staff. One of the other things that we did in terms of internally is our manager meetings, or administrative team meetings. We started to try to do them more, and not just a lot of that housekeeping stuff that we usually do. You know, honestly, housekeeping stuff you can sort out through email, but we really wanted to do something like, we were going to be talking like this every week. Let's make it meaningful. So we try to do we try to use make the meetings more innovation spaces, where we're talking about what we're learning, what we're thinking about, what does this mean to us moving forward. We want to do more of them. We kind of stopped them for a little bit, only because it's just been kind of like, because some reading, it's been kind of a crazy summer for us. But we do plan on doing that a lot more, and having actually more of our meetings in innovation spaces where we're talking about learning about our community and the implications for it, instead of just like, oh, so how many, like who's let's talk about leave time for holidays or whatever. Yeah, so we want to keep continuing to really, like, you know, have that seeing everything through the lens of the Harwood practice and being turned outward. I know for me, I have the advantage of, again, I have 2 libraries that I went, that I had the experience of going through this. I'm lucky in that regard because I've had a lot of experience in it. And in a lot of ways, I've already kind of like, I guess, internalized it. So everything I do and everything I say is always like, I always end up with like, well, what are we doing in terms of the community? I know I did that a lot at San Diego Public whenever there was some sort of like major, when I was some sort of like planning meeting. I'm the one who always brought up, well, how does it look for the community? I mean, it's as simple as that for me. It's just like, is asking that question and seeing what the answer is. Let's see. So as far as what we see with moving forward with what we've been doing, we do want to do a lot more conversations. Conversations I know are really important. The community conversations are really important, and being out there in community and asking. But it's, again, it's more for us is really also looking at to see like who else can we partner with, and what are their, what is their mission, and how do they talk, as I already mentioned. I don't know if I have time, but I do want to talk a little bit about our recent experience with our drag queen story time, which was really an interesting experience for us because
you have time.
Okay, thanks. So we had in the past couple of months, we have been dealing with backlash because we had a drag queen story time. So we were planning it. We did not expect the kind of backlash it got or the attention that it got, but it was basically the headline news for all of San Diego County for a good 2 weeks. Every day there was some new development, and basically, it was controversial. But what was interesting in it was hearing voices and the community talking about this does not reflect the community, and another voice saying, yes, it does reflect the community. So we were really listening to that. I mean, amid all of the noise of the controversy, our administrative team was really looking at like trying to listen in and going like, what are we hearing here? So, a lot of questions, a lot of existential questions came into play, of course, like what are our library values? Why do we do the things that we do? And of course, what really helped us was having the Harwood practice sort of like be a really indispensable tool, and kind of thinking like, but wait a minute, let's forget about the library, but what is the community kind of saying here? And are we really, are we able to really reflect are we reflecting what our community is saying? Are we reflecting the reality of people's reality? And I think in the end we were, but it was just really playing out in a very uncomfortable way, just with all the conversations, and we kind of viewed the whole experience really through the lens of Harwood. At least I did, because that, again, I just kind of like all of that stuff is kind of second nature to me now. But we really, it made us pay more attention to how authentic and how intentional we are in what we're doing. And that intentionality of are we really turned outward? I think I think it's really helped us because we've really come back into focus, and we really want to try to do more conversations because we feel like we haven't maybe not listened enough, but we're moving forward. It taught us a lot of lessons, but in terms of the Harwood practice, it was extremely valuable. As painful as it was at times, it was probably one of the best things to happen to us. So more conversations. We just know that there's so much more public knowledge to gain, and I think the staff as well, the rest of the staff are feeling the same way. It's sort of like a reset, a reboot. And I love the fact that they're still kind of like thinking in terms of the Harwood thing. One example of I want to agree with what Kelli said about the small wins, because one of the small wins that we had was one of our librarians has really taken just being outward turned to heart, and she runs Spanish story times, and just talking to the families afterward, and just really listening to them, really deeply listening to them. The parents themselves started to develop a program with her, a plant exchange that we've been doing that's been really successful. They've also are now part of an initiative that we're trying to do with the deaf community, and so we're trying to get ASL. We have ASL story times, but more ASL classes. So it's been really kind of interesting what she's been doing with it, because not only is she just like listening, but she's having the families and the parents participate in creating library program for us, generated by them. So I'm really intrigued to seeing what else she does with it. But that is little tiny small wins, but it's just it was so nice to hear and to see, and how these parents feel like they were like, ooh, we are the community, and we are creating library programming. I think that's all I'm going to say. I have more, but I think we were probably going to save that for later. Carlton,
Okay.
The key
Okay.
factor.
So I have something I want you to follow up on a little bit, because I think it would be of interest. You spoke around the staff members of the branches doing the conversations, and how you just had different branch people do conversations and you mixed it up, and how people keep talking about those conversations even a year later, which is a wonderful example of embedding the practice in an organization and getting it to be more turned outward. But was there preparation involved in that? What degree? Did you have to show them how to do the conversation? Did you just give them the workbook and say, do it? And what did that look like?
We did. So what we did was we started our own just staff conversations, and we explained to them, this is, we're going to talk to you right now. It's going to take about an hour and a half. We want you to take off your library hats. And so you're not just members of the community. What we're going to do with this is that we're going to try to get a deeper knowledge of like what it is that matters to you as community members. I mean, it was as simple as that. And we also said that we're going to be doing this as well. It's going to help us. It's going to help us with our services and our programs, and that way we really reorient our minds to be a little more impactful. That was like really simple as that. And it was, and the thing is, it was great because it was the administrative team saying like, we're going to do this. And so, didn't really have any choice at this point. You're going to do this. And it came out to a really great conversation, but I had no idea. I mean, I wasn't familiar with the staff at that point, so I didn't know what they were going to say. So it was great to hear like what they were thinking about. So.
Yeah. So you just sort of presented it and said, we're going to have this conversation, and in some cases you had branch managers, I think, lead those conversations that didn't do it before.
Yeah, because those branch managers had already gone to the innovators lab. So.
Okay. All right. So having some experience with the conversation, would you say that's necessary for them to do it for themselves in their own place?
I would say yes. I think I think going through it and going through like how you think through the process and asking the questions, I really think it helps. And what's funny is that the note-taking people, for when we started doing the community conversations, people were like, oh, I'll do note-taking. Note-taking is the hard part. The actual questioning and the questions and going through those and kind of moderating is, I always felt was the easier part. But it was the note-taking, because the note-taking you really have to pay attention, and even more so, I think. So that was a really valuable experience for them, so that they knew what to listen for and how to observe a conversation, the nuances and all of that needed to be, we needed to remind them of that.
Yeah. So I'm really glad you brought that out, as well as the other things. But for a lot of the people in this webinar here, if you haven't used the practice much yet, a constant that I tend to see is give people an experience of using one of these tools. And once they have an experience using one of the tools, they tend to understand what the framework is about. It's sometimes hard just to talk about it. You need to experience it. Anyway, thanks very much. You gave me some ideas of things to follow up with you on. So we're going to move on to Jean now. And Jean is, Jean is somebody I met back when ALA first started with the Harwood practice. And I'm just going to let her dive into what she's been doing at the Springfield City Library in Massachusetts.
Great. Thanks, Carlton. And what an act I have to follow with Kelli and Bev and Erwin talking about their experiences. I made so many notes. Yes, back in 2013, I believe it was, I attended the New England Library Association conference, and Rich Harwood was the kickoff speaker, keynote speaker. And I was pretty wowed with what he had to say. I've always thought of myself as someone who's very engaged with the community and an open type person. And now I really had a name for it, of that being turned outward, and started to think about a framework that I could bring that back to my library. Fortunately, he was joined at the conference for a follow-up session with Maureen Sullivan, who was she was finishing up her term as ALA president at that time, and was launching an initiative to bring the Harwood practice together with American Library Association. And so I got really excited about it and talked about it with some folks here back at the library. And we put together an application to ALA, and we're very fortunate to be selected as one of the 10 public libraries that were part of the first cohort of Libraries Transforming Communities. And I know ALA has used that umbrella to talk about some of the other community engagement activities and trainings, learnings. But I think that's where it all started. So just to back up a little bit, Springfield, Massachusetts is my beautiful city, and we have a population of about 154,000 people here. It's very diverse. A lot of folks are African American, Asian, Latino, Latinx, or identify biracial, multicultural. 11% of folks are foreign-born, and there are a lot of immigrant groups from Latin America, Asia, Europe, and Africa. Over 57 languages are spoken in the public schools, and it's obviously tapered right now, but it has been a spot where many refugees have resettled as they've started their new life here in the United States. So we have 9 library locations, and when we went into the project, we thought we would work at a couple of our branch libraries. We do have 8 branches plus our central library. You're looking at that nice Carnegie building there on the slide. That's our central library. We ended up selecting one of the branches, and so it was a really big learning experience for us, as well as for ALA, and to some extent, I believe, Harwood, because we had coaches. Carlton was one of the coaches that was working with our cohort. And so part of the work was to train us, but they were also being great listeners, putting that practice into practice. And we did some work on modifying some tools so that they were tweaked to be working better in libraries and in their communities. So there had been talk about the Ask exercise and the community conversation tools and so forth throughout this, and Carlton alluded to it, but they are all available also on the website. I believe it's still ala.org/LTC, as in Libraries Transform Communities. So that's a good starting place where you can see what is there. So when we got the grant, we had some very intensive training to do. We went to the different ALA conferences in the following year, as well as midwinter, doing all of that work. And then at the same time, we were working back here in Springfield and running the community conversation. So I have something similar as to what Erwin was talking about. He did 10 to 14, I think that's where I heard it. And we were about 10 or so. And they were an amazing way to find out more about the community and help us feel that we could, I don't want to say speak for people in the community, but we know what the concerns are, we know what the aspirations are of our community members, and we know the way that people are talking about things. So that was so helpful. It was an emotional process too. I think that's something that you should keep in mind when you're thinking about doing these exercises. I think the questions are pulled together so well that they can really, you do the work also of bringing good people into the room, people who will share with you, but they're going to share some things that they're really feeling deeply. And that's a privilege to be in the room with people when they are telling you about how they really feel about where they live, what they really aspire to for their children, what fears they might have, what's getting in the way for them, who they would trust to move forward. That's a super important and illuminating question that's part of the community conversation. If so-and-so, fill in the blank, were involved, who would you, to move this project forward, who would you trust to do that? And I'll talk about that in a moment. It has been quite some time since we did this practice, and we haven't done any more community conversations in a couple of years. I had an amazing team that was part of the team that traveled to the conferences and was organizing and offering the community conversations and the other work that we did. And a number of them no longer work here at Springfield City Library. So, Queens in New York City is the benefit of Jeff, and, and so on and so forth. A couple people have left, but I have been able to carry on with a couple of the folks who are still here, as well as work to embed these practices or ways of thinking into our everyday work, normalizing, if you will. So some of the things that we've done, I'm just going to refer to some notes here. In order to make this work stick, we need to always be listening. That's come up a couple of times, and it's so true. And we need to be recalling things that we have heard from the community, and we need to challenge things that either people in the community are saying or people within our organization are saying, if they really don't jibe with what we know, because we're listening to the community. So it's a great tool for decision making. I think personally about knowing what my core values are. That helps me make decisions. If I know what the community's, in a sense, core values are, that helps us make decisions about what is going to be a good program to offer, or how we should revise a policy and so forth. So when we have openings at the library, because we are a fairly large system and we often are able to promote people from within, or sometimes, as I was mentioning, some people go off to benefit other locations. So when we are recruiting, I do a lot of that work. And what my aim is eventually is to build up a staff that is all turned outward, right? As much as that is as possible, to have the entire staff that way. So what I do when I am putting out recruiting messages is use the lingo, the language of being turned outward. I focus on staff, join our staff that does this type of thing in the community, that has won awards for this type of community work. So giving folks the sense of what it's like to work here, in the hopes of appealing to people who already have that sense of being turned outward, whether they know the lingo or not. Then screening is really important once the applications come in. This is another way to suss out, you know, who the folks are who are going to work well in this type of atmosphere, and help us achieve what we want to achieve. So I always ask the question of why Springfield? No, I don't think that's totally unfamiliar question for a screening interview. It's a way to find out if someone has done any research about the community and the library, but I also can glean other information from that about things that they would like to do within the community that they would be joining. When someone has a full interview, again, we go to that why Springfield, and also when people are doing their presentation, often about a program they would like to develop for people in the community, that lets, you know, not only can I see, oh, they know to talk about a budget or public relations for it, but also have they been thinking about what they have learned about the community, assuming it's somebody who doesn't live here already. Are they thinking in that way? Then let's see, I did have that question or presentation made by someone who's our teen services librarian now, and she didn't live around here. But really thought about things and really keyed into what she could learn about the library and what she could imagine that the teens here would want. And she came up with an awesome poetry slam program, but it also keyed in on teen leadership development and on the search for social justice through the arts and own voices and a multitude of other values that we know that our teens are looking for. So she definitely got the job and is doing a great job here. So we're excited about that. That's a way for people to shine. Other things that we do, and I think Erwin in particular was talking about this, is normalize this type of conversation and work. We revamped our monthly report form that people fill in, branch managers fill in. And we ask, what are we hearing from the community? And so what we had to do a little tweak to that was to add, especially if it's not about the library, right? So also in Pennsylvania, you were talking about how you kept hearing things about the library, and this question has helped even the staff to think about things differently. So when people were still struggling with that, and I remember we were in a meeting and then somebody just made an offhand comment and said, oh, you know, the people are always coming up to me at the reference desk asking, how can they clear their quarry? And in Massachusetts, a quarry stands for criminal records investigation. I forget what the O is, but it's something that most jobs run, a background check essentially. And so this told us, aha, that's something that is a concern of many people. They want to get back to work. They paid their time, or they have done whatever needs to happen. And they want to get back to work. They want to get back into, being a money earner so that they can have a regular life, just like you and I. And so this tells us that if our workforce development team is thinking about having a program that addresses that concern, we're definitely going to approve that program and, run with it. If a community organization wants to book one of our meeting rooms for a presentation on a topic like that, resume writing when you've been incarcerated or after incarceration, yes, that's something we definitely want to do. So the more that we're paying attention to things like that, the better. And so we just have to normalize these things into our data and story collection so that people are it's reinforced that people should be listening for that kind of thing and sharing that with our colleagues. One thing that I wanted to mention as a great story that came out of the community conversations was, in more than one conversation, we had people talk about a monument that's on the front lawn of the branch library where we focused our work. It's run by the park department, but it's right on our front lawn. And Springfield, Massachusetts is where basketball was invented. We have the Basketball Hall of Fame. But there was a community member who a few years ago wanted to commemorate the location of the first game of basketball. And it was kitty corner across from the library. So the space that was available was right on our front yard. And he worked tirelessly to get people involved from the Hall of Fame or other businesses in town, the NBA. I mean, he had so much work that he had to do to get the permissions and the funds and the design and the artists and so forth for this monument to be created. And so it's a sculpture at the center of it, a man dressed with the long shorts, as in olden days, or I'm sorry, the short basketball shorts, probably as olden days that basketball players would wear. And he's bouncing a basketball, all in bronze, of course, to a young child across from him in the middle of this circle, who's modeled after some kids from the library. And then there's some plantings surrounding those statues, and then about 8 panels. It'd be hard for me to describe them very well, but they tell the history of basketball through time, and they are lit up at night with different colors. And so when that was first unveiled, it was a huge sense of pride for the neighborhood that something so beautiful and historical was located right in the center of where they live, and in a very visible place for everyone to see. Well, there were some issues, and they ended up boarding up the glass panels, and people thought, okay, well, they're going to fix this, they're going to take care of it, and then they'll be unboarded, and we'll be back to what we started with. But just time kept going by, kept going by, kept going by. And then when there was Basketball Hall of Fame Enshrinement Weekend, someone who was in one of our conversations said, yes, I was here Enshrinement Weekend, and I went by and I saw it, and it was amazing. And then my cousin was in town the next weekend, and I took him up there to see it, and they were boarded up again. So from that, people started feeling that distrust or lack of trust between institutions and the community that came up so often in our conversations, because it appeared evident to everyone that they were boarded up just in case the community did something to them. It was fine for Enshrinement Weekend, but they needed to be protected from the community. And I mean, I can still feel it right now, the pain that people felt in that room when they were sharing stories about this and what that meant to them. So we knew that that was a key thing to look at. And we did carry that information forward. Harwood talks about being a steward of public knowledge. Sometimes that's the role as libraries we're going to play, is sharing that information with people who may be able to act on it. And I know that we weren't the only voice bringing that information forward, but I can tell you that not long after we did, those panels were unboarded, and they have not been boarded up since. So it's an incredible story to me, and I'm so happy. I had to go out and take a selfie in front of them and share that with everyone. But it's just such a really good feeling. So yeah, that's what I want to share with you. And I look forward to hearing any questions you have, and chiming in with my co-panelists. Thank you.
Yes, I have a question for you, Jean. You know, you've done a lot with hiring and recruiting very intentionally.
Yes.
And I'm just sort of arc of time, what does that look like? And like, if you're going back to 14, 15, when you started doing that to now, is that a quick change? Is it a slow change? What does it feel like?
Well, you know, sometimes I think it depends on what is driving the vacancies. Certainly, you know, we have rashes of retirements usually in January. So I know I hired a bunch of people this year. That's just a function of, you know, retirement benefits. But it does take a while. We have about 90 employees altogether. And so, you know, your hope is that to change your staff into being a more turned outward folks is that, you know, you're there already, right? That may be what drew you into librarianship, or that with coaching and training, people can kind of come around. Another thing you may be able to do is reassign people to areas where, you know, that lack of that orientation won't have as much of an impact. You know, people perhaps who were not turned outward still have value, of course. And then sometimes, you know, people just decide to change because they're seeing the organization change. Sorry, they decide to leave because they're seeing the organization change. That's, you know, less frequent, but it happens sometimes.
Yeah, I've noticed, that's one thing I've noticed, that it's not uncommon as an organization shifts for some people to say, you know, I just don't fit here anymore.
Yes.
And they move on. But so that's really good. Thanks very much. And I'm just going to see if anybody has any comments before we move on here. We've got some piece here where I want everybody to participate. So if Colleen, you could put everybody's video and audio back up. I've got a couple of sort of shared reflection questions, which is, you know, what factors, and these are sort of lessons learned for the people here, you know, what factors do you consider really key to creating and supporting a turned outward culture? And then what advice do you have for other libraries striving to strengthen this for themselves? And anybody just go ahead and chime in and have a little conversation around it.
I think it's important to have leadership totally engaged with this. I mean, our director was part of our cohort and attended all the offsite trainings. So that was super important. Some of the tools can be helpful, you know, that allow you to kind of make a pact with yourself. Carlton, you'll remember the name of it, and just
keep personal covenant.
Thank you, and keep that as a point of reference. Yeah, and you know, run with the willing is something another one of the cohort members would always say. You know, surround yourself with the people who are that way, and you know, just take your learnings and get out there in the community. I mean, there's nothing like attending other people's events and seeing what is important to people who are attending those, for example.
I can speak to that a little bit. One of the things you have to make sure you do is choose a good team. Make sure that you have people working on this with you who believe in this, believe that it is a culture that you're going to make a part of your library, and not just something that you've got to get over and done with because, you know, we've got 2 years to make this happen and then we're going to be done with it. This is an ongoing culture, a philosophy that is going to continue. And if you have a good team that believes in that, that's a good basis. Make sure that you include your boards, your friends board, your trustees, so that they are aware of what's going on and they can speak to this in their community. And don't get discouraged, because we did. It was very difficult for us at some point when we were finding how stuck we really are. And I know that's come up several times. But we talked with our coach, and we got a lot of encouraging words, and it really helped us to keep going and to understand that we really were accomplishing things, that the small wins that we were getting were important, and they were a step toward the future. And so just don't stop trying. That's the biggest thing I have to say.
Yeah, I'd like to echo all that. I think that, you know, you really have to make that commitment and the time. If you don't prioritize it, it's not gonna feel important. I've been through that as well, where it's where, you know, you get into so much busy work and you just kind of forget about it. But you really have to make that commitment. And I think that, I mean, at the very least, being turned outward, I think is very, it's important enough to a concept to hold on to, because I mean, doesn't everybody, like in our profession, want to have a really good knowledge of who we're serving? I think that's just really the core of it. How this is not really part of how we do things and how we think. It is a mental shift to some extent, but it's not. I feel like it's just always been sort of our core, a part of what we are as public libraries. So, and then I think the other bit of advice for me is just like, find a way to start talking about it and just kind of like normalizing it. Like you're saying, it's just find a way to talk about it to people, and not maybe try not to jargon it too much, but just kind of like talk about it in a way that people can relate to it. I think that helps.
Yeah, so Beverly, I see you shaking your head. Yes.
Yeah, we've had discussions about how, especially moving forward, the community might not recognize what we're doing as turning outward. And even our staff might not recognize what they or we are doing as being, quote, you know, all the phrases and everything, but they know that change is happening and that they can be part of it, whatever language that involves.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think you referenced that people in the library coming in there, they noticed something different. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Any questions from people? We've got the chat line open. If anybody has any chat line, it's not a chat line, it's a chat box. Anybody have any questions for our panelists here?
If I may mention something else
Sure.
about partnerships, I had said that one of the questions we found very valuable was, helped us elicit, you know, who are the partners that people would trust to help move forward. And that is included in our new community narrative, which is a new way of talking about what our community can be, not just focusing on, oh yeah, but we tried that and it didn't work, or it always turns out this way, right? We wind that up with, for us, if guarding the community played a role, we think that it would work. We'd be able to reach our aspirations. And so this is an organization we had worked with before, but it's really helped crystallize that we want to continue partnering with them. It's a grassroots organization, and they provide mentoring by what Bev was talking about, the young adults who they've already graduated from high school, but you know, they're not quite adults yet. They mentor, that age of young adults mentors younger teens. It's growing food right there in the community, and it's providing some leadership development opportunities. So these were all things that we had been hearing in the conversations that people wanted for their community. And so it was like, yes, of course, that we're going to continue partnering with them. We're going to expand partnering with them. And it also helps you see gee, you know, such and such an organization's always asking us to come over, but there's not a lot of follow through, XYZ. Maybe we just move on from them. They're not aligned with what we hear from the community that is what they really want.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's that helps because as libraries being such a great place to partner with, doesn't everybody always say, you know, come to our meeting, come to our event, can we have a meeting at your library, that kind of thing. But how do you prioritize? So that helps.
So this is very good. Thank you very much. I am compelled to make one comment about partners because you all talked about that. And for those that I've had the privilege of working with as a coach, you'll probably remember me saying that one of the ways that you can protect yourself to be turned outward is to surround yourself with turned outward partners. And if you surround yourself with turn inward partners, they tend to turn you inward with them. So you have to be really thoughtful about, you know, or what are your partners saying? How are they talking about the community? Like, or when you were mentioning the school district. So I've got a question here. How do you lead a team to turn outward and they really want to make the changes when they already feel they are doing everything right?
You have to make sure that they listen to what is said at these community conversations. You have to really try to get them to understand that they've got to put all biases aside and all thoughts aside and really listen to what is actually being said and trust the people that are talking from the community, that they know what they're talking about. I've said many times, as librarians, we all think that we know what's best for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to listen, and that's the biggest thing I can say. Just make sure that they put any preconceived notions aside and truly listen.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to say use one of the tools. Use the ask tool, or I mean the turn quiz.
Yeah.
That's just as a quick, like, you got 30 seconds. You can kind of just go through it and say, like, people as citizens versus consumers. It actually, I think that's a great start. And maybe just go through, hey, humor me, let's do a community conversation. Here are the questions, let's do that.
Yeah.
I think if they go into, I mean, the thing is, even it's not, I mean, the premise isn't that we're always turned outward. I mean, I think, as I mentioned, it's a matter of questioning, am I turned outward or am I turned outward enough? I think that always, to me, is like the question we'll always be asking. And so we're not coming from that place, but that we're not doing everything right because we're doing everything right. But I think it's getting them to think that, to always question it. Are you? I don't know. Talk about it.
Mm-hmm. And you can always ask people or remind people that you don't have to be doing poorly to do better, right? I mean, you can always get better.
Yep.
Yeah, some really good ideas here. Another question, has anyone seen community conversations help build community cohesion, countering the fragmentation that's so characteristic in our communities today?
Not yet.
You're on that path?
We hope so.
Wish. That's the dream.
That's the dream?
Yes.
I mean, when you bring people together from representing different segments, something might happen. I did see conversations after the fact, after the snack, during the snacks, whatever. I don't have any specific examples, but when you are starting to make change based on what comes out of that, what are the recommendations for that? People wanted to reclaim outdoor space, so we're doing more programming outside on the front lawn near that basketball monument, and bringing people together there. It's small steps, but I know a lot of libraries have talked about doing group cleanups, and that can promote a feeling of safety, or just more pride in your neighborhood. And so those kinds of things can help bring people together.
So I can give one example that I've seen. I've seen several examples of this community cohesion thing. Jean might remember in the ALA cohort at a time when Suffolk, Virginia was in there with us. And Suffolk, one of their original conversations was in a very small rural community in that county. And I can remember them telling me that in the conversation, the people that were there, what they heard from each other, what they heard that they were struggling with, there was a bond that was created. And that group actually went out and formed themselves as a committee that went out of that conversation and actually created a list of things to do together that where they could move forward and make a difference. I've heard the same type of thing in Carmel, California, that's bubbled up out of a conversation. A number of cases, just having a conversation where people are heard. They see that they have common things that they want to see changed, and they sort of see a possibility of hope that they can move forward just out of that. And I've seen a number of examples of that just come out of doing a conversation. Let me see. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, we have a lot of those silos. I think many places do. And what I've been trying as I've been getting out and talking, as we've been getting out and talking, trying to explain to people that we don't want to step on anybody's toes. We just want to dance with you.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So I have another question here, which I was missing because it was in a different screen, but what do you do about required 5-year plans? And do you still come up with long-term goals? So this relates to strategic planning, and maybe what does that look like with the Harwood practice?
I can address that just a little bit. We are beginning our new strategic planning with the board in about next week, actually. And this is going to be a focus of our strategic planning sessions, the turning outward. So not sure how it's going to go, exactly how it's going to be incorporated, but it's definitely right at the forefront.
And we have just had our new strategic plan approved by our board just earlier this month. We're doing a 3-month plan because that tends to be nowadays what people do because things change so quickly. But it was heavily influenced by what we learned from the community, and the strategic priorities are all about building equity through access, innovation and inspiration, growing communities, and fostering success. On the slide with my name on it, those are the new values that we have created. So it was one of the documents, the narrative and all of the work from the conversation, one of the documents we reviewed when we were gathering information in order to write the plan. It's a great tool for that.
Yeah, there is actually a tool called Turning Outward in Strategic Planning in Libraries. So if you can poke around, I'm not exactly sure if that's on the ALA website. I think it is, that you can find it there. But I imagine after this webinar that we can send it out to the people that are participants, and so you can see that tool. It talks about how to integrate turning outward into strategic planning. So anyway, thank you very much to everybody. Just as one final thing, I really appreciate everybody taking the time to do this because I know you're all busy already, and just so kudos to all of you and thanks very much for taking the time. One more thing I wanted to just bring to everybody's attention is there are some options to move forward. You can go to the harwoodinstitute.org/libraries for resources for libraries. There's also going to be another webinar on November 20th, and that's the library's role when disaster strikes. And when we say disaster, we mean things like floods or fires that wipe out a community. Something, a big disaster, not just your toilet overflowing. Upcoming training opportunities. There's a Public Innovators Lab for Libraries. That's October 15th through 17th in Atlanta. And it's co-hosted by the American Library Association. And then Rich Harwood's doing a tour around the country with his new book, Stepping Forward. And the tour is really about mobilizing communities to bring a new message of hope to the nation and action. kids. So if you want more information on that, you know, reach out to visit thesteppingforward.org to learn more about that. And with that, I'll just say thank you to everybody for joining us today, and I hope the rest of your day is good.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Keep in touch.